Start. Welcome, everybody. I'm Chris Hoffman, Executive Director of the Beaches Museum. I am thrilled to welcome you tonight from the comfort of my kitchen and appreciate you guys all taking some time out of your evening to join us this evening. I want to first recognize any Beaches Museum members that are on the call, as well as I think we have a few staff people, and of course to recognize Professor Cohill's class that she says. I can kind of see some reflections in the whiteboard behind you. So welcome, JU students. We're glad to have you all today. And I just want to give a few updates on what's going on at the museum before we turn it over to Brittany. Right now, the exhibit that we have up is Breaking Ground Beyond Bathing Beauties. This was part of our 2020 effort to celebrate 100 years since the passage of the 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote. Of course, we all know how 2020 went. We put the exhibit up late, so we're holding it over, and we're going to keep it up through this year's Women's History Month, which is March. So if you haven't seen it, it's definitely worth a stop by. The museum is open and continues to be free thanks to the donation of Maxwell and Edna Dickinson. However, if you aren't able to come by in person, we are going to be recording our archivist and curator narrated tour of the exhibit that will be up at some point in the month of March. So keep an eye out for that. But if you can come see it in person, we are maintaining social distancing, mask wearing, and all of those good things to help you have a safe experience. Our next Boardwalk talk after Brittany will be Dr. Peggy Mcdonald. She is going to be speaking about women's suffrage in the state of Florida specifically. You may remember her from last year. She spoke about prominent women in Florida's history, and she's a fantastic speaker. This will also be all on Zoom, so keep an eye out for that. It should be a really great time to learn about women's suffrage and women's history in Florida from a real expert. So all that being said, a few other events coming up. We have Spring in the Blooms, which will be on April 10th. And we're really just taking things 2 months at a time right now. So keep an eye on our website, social media, and our emails for everything else that we have coming up. Now to introduce Brittany, and we got to know Brittany at the Beaches Museum very early on as an intern, and she managed to get 2 semesters of internship out of us, and we were so glad that she did. She stayed around long enough that we hired her as our operations manager and then associate director. And about this time last year, she started detaching from the Beaches Museum. We made it very hard for her to leave, but we're very excited for her to be a professor at JU now, among other things. But one of the coolest things that I got to see Brittany do was work on researching Manhattan Beach. From her time as a student at UNF, she got her master's degree there, to her time as a professional with the museum. She really pulled a lot of threads and developed a really rich story and history of a place that we may not otherwise know a lot about. So it was really neat to be able to be on the sidelines and watch her do that. So a few housekeeping things. Normally I would tell you where the bathrooms are, but you guys should all know where they are in your house. So I can't help you there, but I think we have muted everyone. So other than, I think Brittany will probably do a Q&A at the end. Please just go ahead and keep your phones or your computers on mute. And if you do have some questions at the end, I know she'll be happy to answer them. So thank you again all for being here. And Professor Cohill, take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris. I'm really happy to be giving this presentation. It's a presentation that I've given several times in the past, and each time, I add more and more to it, and that would not be possible without the help of several individuals who I want to thank first and foremost before we get started. Oh, and I wanted to say, it says Susan Miller in the corner of my screen. I am indeed Brittany Cohill. I'm just logged into someone else's account. However, I wanted to thank especially Mrs. Norma June Wilson Davis, who is in the audience with us this evening, which I'm very honored, for that. And also Dr. Yvonne Hicks and Mr. Kenneth Lassane. They are all descendants of Mac Wilson, who was a prominent business owner at Manhattan Beach. And Mrs. June Davis in particular is a very accomplished genealogist, I'm finding out. And early on in my research, I had turned to Ancestry.com and was able to put together more pieces than I thought I would be able to, because of the work that she had already done for her family's history and family tree. So that was just invaluable information. And then meeting Dr. Hicks and Mr. Lassane in person also turned out to be a godsend as far as piecing together this timeline and this history. So without them, especially, this would not be possible. Okay, so let's get started with the history of Manhattan Beach. And I'm in my classroom, so I tend to fidget a little more when I'm in my own space here, so I apologize for that in advance. But I titled my talk Recovering Manhattan Beach. I do that for a couple of reasons. One, because the history of this landmark has been obscured for so long, and it's been overshadowed by other histories that I'm not saying are not important, but they've just obscured Manhattan Beach. And I came to this topic because I was actually studying a environmental history topic related to Hanna Park. And I was meeting with a professor of mine at UNF. And when I was talking with him, he said, you know, it's really too bad that Hanna Park overshadows the history of Manhattan Beach. And now I thought to myself, I lived in Jacksonville for about 35 years, and I had never heard of Manhattan Beach. And the more I talked to others, it became clear that many others had not heard of Manhattan Beach. And so I started doing a little digging, and it has landed us here at this story. And as you can see, the timeline takes us from about the turn of the century, 1900, and into the late 1930s. And so this presentation will focus on a couple of things. First, kind of putting together that overall picture for you, that timeline, and then also injecting where I can a bit of context. So how does Manhattan Beach fit into the larger story of US history? But then also taking it larger, but also taking it smaller and focusing on, you know, that human face of Manhattan Beach. I was really able to do that with Mac Wilson. So let's go ahead and get started, and I will hopefully see. There we go. So I want to start by placing you, grounding you in the geography a little bit. Many of you tuning in probably know where Hanna Park is, but I know some of my students are from out of town, and maybe some of you are also from out of town. So Hanna Park is located in Northeast Florida, just north of Atlantic Beach. And you can see this is a map from the Florida East Coast Railway. It's an early map. And you can see Manhattan Beach here, just above Atlantic Beach. You also see the Continental Hotel. That will also figure into our story in just a second. And then you can see its location as it relates to Jacksonville. I have a question. Do you guys see my mouse pointer as well?
Yes.
Okay, very good. All right. So you can see Manhattan Beach's location, present day Hanna Park, in relation to Jacksonville and Atlantic Beach. And I also have this Google map that all of you, it should be a familiar sight. And it shows you where Catherine Abbey Hanna Park is right now, again, just north of Atlantic Beach. And here you see it in relation to Mayport. And so I wanted to start by saying that the park is named for noted historian Dr. Catherine Abbey Hanna. And this park opened in 1972. and it spans 1.5 miles of beachfront and encompasses 447 acres of land that is dedicated to nature-based activities. Now, Dr. Hanna devoted her decades-long career to advocating for the preservation of Florida's natural spaces through the Florida State Park system. And indeed, she published numerous books on environmental history, including Florida, Land of Change, and Lake Okeechobee, Wellspring of the Everglades. But it is this memory of Dr. Catherine Abby Hanna that overshadows the history of Manhattan Beach. So beyond her memory and beneath the feet of today's park visitors lies the history of Manhattan Beach, which is Florida's first African-American beach resort in the segregated South. Oil, railroad, and hotel magnate Henry M. Flagler conceived of Manhattan Beach as an African-American destination in 1900. Initially a center of recreation for Black employees of his Florida East Coast companies, Manhattan Beach grew into a vibrant seaside retreat, attracting thousands of Black beachgoers from points all over the Southeast. African Americans were barred from enjoying all other beaches in Northeast Florida during the first 3 decades of the 20th century. Manhattan Beach remained a bustling hub of African American culture and leisure through the 1930s. But by the end of that decade, however, every bathhouse, snack bar, and dance hall had been demolished, as Manhattan Beach could not overcome the forces working against it. So I'll begin a little bit with Henry Flagler. In 1870, he partnered with a friend and fellow businessman that you may have heard of, John D. Rockefeller, to form the Standard Oil Company. And through Standard Oil, Flagler amassed a personal fortune because Standard Oil held a monopoly over the US production, marketing, and transportation of oil. So in the 1880s, Flagler and his first wife, Mary Harkness, traveled to Northeast Florida. Mary suffered from tuberculosis at a time when doctors prescribed humid coastal air as treatment. He encountered a rural yet beautiful landscape, and he saw opportunity to develop Florida as a winter destination for wealthy northern vacationers. In 1888, he built the Ponce de Leon Hotel in St. Augustine, which is now Flagler College. And soon after, he purchased and improved area railroads, eventually constructing the Florida East Coast Railway, which was a transoceanic rail system stretching the entire east coast of Florida and ending in Key West. Now, as you can see, if you look closely at this map, his eventual goal was to reach Cuba from the Keys, but that did not materialize before Flagler died in May of 1913. Jacksonville's beaches, as you can see if you look closely on this map, were at the northern end of Flagler's hotel and railway empire. And Mayport served as a strategic port for receiving the coal and materials needed to fuel and maintain the rail system. In June 1901, Flagler opened the Oceanfront Continental Hotel in Atlantic Beach, and this is situated between 7th and 10th Streets in Atlantic Beach. It featured luxury accommodations, an elegant dining room. It could seat up to 350 guests at any one time. It had an 800-foot pier that jutted out into the Atlantic Ocean. And truly, if you can imagine, the Continental was a majestic sight along the seashore. Now, Flagler's Continental Hotel was never profitable, and he soon lost interest in this Atlantic Beach venture. And cheap land prices, combined with the steady income of a railroad job, enabled African Americans to eventually purchase Manhattan Beach property from Flagler's company. However, before this, in order to construct and staff his Northeast Florida operations and truly the rest of his empire, Flagler relied on the labor of African-American construction crews, railroaders, and hospitality workers. Some of these laborers were transient residents. They would follow the railroad work across the Southeast. Some lived with their families in the western portion of Atlantic Beach, while others lived in a dormitory style building located not far from the Continental Hotel. However, the Continental Hotel and its beachfront, like most Florida resorts before the Civil Rights Act of 1964, was a whites-only destination. So in their downtime, Black employees were barred from sharing recreational spaces with white hotel guests and beachgoers. Henry Flagler designated Manhattan Beach, which was an undeveloped stretch of coastline located just 2 miles north of the Continental Hotel, as an acceptable spot for African Americans. And as I mentioned, eventually he even sold or sometimes gifted Manhattan Beach property to Black rail workers. But this brings into focus the central element of Jim Crow segregation. It was not about complete separation of whites and Blacks. It was a system created to maintain a racial hierarchy. Blacks were permitted by custom and law to share spaces with whites if they were occupying subordinate status. So this is why you would see Black cooks and laundresses and waiters at the Continental Hotel, but you could only see them in that capacity. So just to give you an idea of what Manhattan Beach looked like, there were no roads from Jacksonville to the beach. Atlantic Boulevard did not exist until 1910. And even in 1910, Atlantic Beach had fewer than 100 permanent residents. So it was a rural existence outside the confines of the Continental Hotel acreage. Manhattan Beach in the interior was truly the land of palmettos, scrub pines, and mosquitoes. An oral history that I found during my research at the Beaches Museum kind of sheds light on this rural nature of Manhattan Beach at its beginnings. So a young man by the name of Steve Keeling, he was born in 1896. He recalled moving to Atlantic Beach, and these are his words. Daddy and we lived in a palmetto shack right over there in Atlantic Beach. And he got a job when they started building the Continental Hotel. He got a job as a night watchman there. And when I was a little boy, we had a horse and wagon. We used to go over there at night and take him something to eat. Going back home one night, a panther tried to get in the wagon with us. And when Steve Keeling was in his late teens, he worked for Patrick Ice Company. And again, these are his words. I'd work all day and go down there to Manhattan Beach and lay out on the beach all night. But less than 20 miles inland, it was a much different scene. Jacksonville's population measured more than 28,000 in 1900. 57% of this population was Black and 42% white. And by 1910, the population had more than doubled, with Blacks still comprising about 50% of the total. The Lavilla Neighborhood, which some of you may be familiar with, the Lavilla Neighborhood of downtown Jacksonville was known as the Harlem of the South, a mecca of sorts for the Black community, not only a draw for its cultural value, but also for job opportunities in the rail industry. When Manhattan Beach became an official stop along Flagler's Florida East Coast Rail, and this happened in June of 1907, there was no shortage of customers. So in a way, you can think of Manhattan Beach as a coastal outpost of the Lavilla neighborhood. And now this may be a little blurry, but I'm going to read it for you. This is an article from the Florida Times-Union from June 5th, 1907. So this is just when it became a stop on the rail. And it advertises Children's Day at Manhattan Beach. And the text reads, Children's Day at Manhattan Beach, swept by ocean breezes for colored people. Manager Robb of Manhattan Beach, the popular place of pleasure for colored people, has set aside Thursday, June 6th as Children's Day. And it is safe to say that thousands will attend. The management is careful not to have any objectionable features connected with this place, so common to resorts of its kind. The colored people have long since been in need of just such a place where they could enjoy themselves without molestation. And it is predicted that the step that Fred D. Robb, the promoter and manager of this project, has taken looking to this end will prove a most successful venture to all parties concerned. The rate to Manhattan Beach is 60 cents for adults and children at half rate. And Marcia Dean Phelps, who is the author of An American Beach for African Americans, it's a fantastic book. If you haven't read it yet, I suggest you do. But Marcia Dean Phelps recounts her grandmother's memory of the train ride to Manhattan Beach. And these are her words. Many times I sat on Big Mama Agnes Cobb's front porch, shelling black-eyed peas, listening to her tell of long ago junkets that she, Grandpa Randall, and their 6 children, my aunts and uncles, relished on Manhattan Beach. From Jacksonville, the 44-mile round trip cost adults 60 cents. I had trouble believing Big Mama when she said that on these trains, which left very early in the morning and returned home at dark, Black people rode in the front cars and whites rode in the cars at the end, until my mama explained that the soot, cinders, and smoke from the train's engine blew back and settled heaviest on the cars closest to the engine. Before the train reached the station, according to Aunt Annabelle, everyone's clean clothes were covered with soot. But that was not a deterrent. And by some accounts, more than 1,000 Black beachgoers made the trip to Manhattan Beach every single weekend. Manhattan Beach figured prominently in the life work of Dr. Eartha M. White, who was a devoted philanthropist, humanitarian, and leader in the Jacksonville community until her death in 1974. Eartha White was born on November 8, 1876, to a family of 13 children. And following her mother's death, when Eartha was just an infant, she was adopted by Clara English White, a formerly enslaved woman. Eartha spent her formative years watching her mother feed neighbors in need from their 2-room home. And here pictured standing is Eartha White with her mother, Clara, who is seated. Eartha White founded the Clara White Mission in the early 1900s as a formal extension of the mission work she and her mother had engaged in for years. Eartha White is often referred to as the Angel of Mercy, and she began with her colored old folks home, pictured here, serving poor and elderly African Americans in Florida. She soon expanded to provide a hospital, an orphanage, a home for unwed mothers, and a halfway house for inmates transitioning back into society. She also spearheaded campaigns to feed and care for unwell and hungry school children. And in Eartha White's words, she says, "We do for humanity what the Salvation Army is doing for white people." Eartha White took the elderly, orphaned, and undernourished in her care on day trips to Manhattan Beach, Oftentimes, she was able to negotiate free transportation with the Florida East Coast Railway. She also, and I've heard this about Eartha White, if you have the opportunity, go down to the Ritz Theater. They have a wonderful exhibit on the Lavilla Neighborhood. But if you get a personalized tour, you will hear the stories about Eartha White. And one of the stories is that if you saw her coming, you better turn around and walk the other way because you knew you were going to give her whatever it was she was asking for. That was just the kind of woman that she was. And she also hosted annual fresh air camps during which more than 80 children with tuberculosis would spend 4 weeks living in a tent city, recuperating on the beachfront. Pictured here, unfortunately, this is an undated photo, but this is the first fresh air camp that Eartha White held. Potential donors visited the camp and remarked the following: I visited the health camp and found children happy, singing their songs and very happy. I was highly pleased with what I saw at open air camp at Manhattan Beach and trust it will be firmly established. I visited the health camp, found children happy, listening to stories. A wonderful work is being done here. White was also the president of the City Federation of Colored Women's Clubs, whose motto was not for ourselves, but for others. The CFCWC not only supported the mission work of its members, but also engaged in community organizing and advocacy on behalf of the Black community. State and local conventions, when held in Jacksonville, always included day trips to Manhattan Beach. Black women's organizations such as these were critical in fighting the disenfranchisement of Black men in the 20th century. The Clara White Mission continues to operate in the Lavilla neighborhood today, open to all who are in need. Honoring the legacy of its founder, the mission works to reduce and prevent homelessness in Jacksonville through advocacy, job training, housing, and employment. And Manhattan Beach, in addition to this, was just a vibrant community. Mac Wilson owned, and with the help of his family, operated a pavilion and bathhouse that provided accommodations, dining, and entertainment. And this photograph was taken in 1927. And as I mentioned, I had the great pleasure of meeting with some of Mac Wilson's descendants who still live in the area. And their story, and Mac Wilson's story, is significant not only because it helped to fill in some of these blanks regarding Manhattan Beach, but also, it's a story that I use in my classroom a lot to bring to light the stories of so many Black Americans who were seeking true freedom following emancipation. So Mac Wilson's mother, Minerva, was born into slavery on the Dilworth Plantation in Jefferson County, Florida. Her mother, Hannah Prince, was enslaved there as well. Mac was born in 1875, so his birth took place after the end of the Civil War and emancipation. But in the 1880 census, we see that the Wilson family was still living in Jefferson County. Mac's father, Peter Wilson, was working as a farmer. And this elucidates several things for us, but especially many Black Americans following emancipation had little choice but to continue making a living through agriculture, most through a debt-inducing sharecropping agreement with their former owners. Now, following Peter Wilson's death in 1880, and he was only 35 years old, I believe, by this time, the family eventually found their way to Jacksonville. So by the 1910 census, we see that Mac was living in the Lavilla neighborhood with his wife, Juno, and their children. His aunt, Capitola, who was his mother's sister, owned several parcels of land, both in Lavilla and in Manhattan Beach. And let me tell you, she maintained a tight grip on her Manhattan Beach property. Following Flagler's death, his Mayport Terminal Company attempted to withhold deeds from Black landowners in Manhattan Beach. So Capitola hired an attorney and demanded that they turn over her deed, which they did. Eventually, Mac inherited his aunt's property, and this is the property that served as the location for Mac's place. And so I used this story in the classroom to also show that following emancipation and during the Reconstruction era, even though Reconstruction in the United States was a failure, it was not because Black Americans were not seizing their full rights of citizenship. This was all because of federal, state, and local laws that prevented them from enjoying the full rights of citizenship. But in many ways, this did not stop Black Americans from forging their own paths. So you've seen Mac Wilson and his family in just one generation out of enslavement are now property owners and successful business owners. Oh, sorry, I should have advanced this much sooner. And here is a photograph, courtesy of Mrs. June Davis, of Mac Wilson himself as a young man. William Middleton also owned and operated a pavilion at Manhattan Beach. I know less about the Middleton family, but this is a fantastic picture that the UNF Archives has in its collection. Now, William Middleton's pavilion included a boardwalk that you can see juts out over the dunes, and at high tide, the water would have filled in underneath this small boardwalk. And this photograph was taken in 1920. So access to Manhattan Beach became even more important to African Americans living and working in the greater Jacksonville area as neighboring cities put explicit segregation laws on the books. So Pablo Beach, which is present-day Jacksonville Beach, wrote into its 1924 charter and ordinances, it shall be unlawful for any white person or persons to bathe together with any Negro person or persons, or for a Negro person or persons to bathe together with any white person or persons in the waters of the Atlantic Ocean within the city limits of Pablo Beach. Ernest Davis Sr., who I had the pleasure of knowing before his passing in 2019, was a lifelong Beaches resident and owner of the Voussoir Restaurant and Lounge in Atlantic Beach, which I believe is the longest continuously operating Black-owned establishment in Atlantic Beach. But I had the pleasure of sitting down with him many times while eating in his restaurant. And he recalls his experience working at the Boardwalk in Jacksonville Beach during the 1930s. And he told me, well, you know, on Jack's Beach now, you weren't allowed unless you were working down there. I used to set pins up there at the Sportland bowling alley. If you were working for Martin G. Williams, he would tell the authorities, then my boys, you know, those are my insert offensive word here, because he would call you that in a heartbeat, and they would follow you until you got to the hill. You had to be working down there, and you better not be caught down there. And on the boardwalk, if you were working and you had a white coat on, they know that you worked for the Bamboo Bar. You were a bartender or something like that. And the only time you could go down to that beach at the boardwalk is when they had a storm and they needed you to throw sandbags. If you did not do that, they would put you in jail for vagrancy. That's right. So I threw many a sandbags on that beach. So Ernest Davis, Eartha White, Mac Wilson, William Middleton, day trippers, including the Cobb family, and the many others who visited Manhattan Beach, made a space that offered rest from the realities of being Black in the segregated South. Black-owned businesses at Manhattan Beach operated outside the purview of white control. But by the late 1930s, these businesses were gone. Several factors, environmental, economic, and discriminatory in nature, contributed to the end of Manhattan Beach as a vibrant coastal retreat for African Americans. So schemes to develop Manhattan Beach into a whites-only seaside community were set in motion as early as 1913. In that year, 1913, Henry Flagler had died, and his Florida East Coast companies began to sell most of its land holdings in Northeast Florida, including the Continental Hotel and parts of Manhattan Beach. And a lot of these lands went to the Atlantic Beach Corporation. Harcourt Bull, who is pictured here, a wealthy venture capitalist from New York City, served as lawyer, investor, and director for the corporation. And he articulated his vision for the area in a 1929 edition of Beach Life magazine. And Beach Life magazine asked, "What do the beaches need?" And these are his words. "For everyone knows that from 16th Street, Atlantic Beach, northward to the jetties, there lies a tract of land that is owned by a wealthy syndicate, which is waiting for the psychological moment to come when they will develop the tract as Coral Gables or Hollywood was developed. That moment may be 6 months away, or it may be a year away, but it will, and it will come, and it will come soon." So in order to execute this vision, it was Bull's policy to cease selling Manhattan Beach property to African Americans. What this means is the Black community could no longer endeavor to own an uninterrupted stretch of coastline in the Jacksonville area. Now, Harcourt Bull would rent parcels that he owned to Black business owners. However, written into these rental agreements, one, Harcourt Bull's company would get a cut of the profit, but two, their lease of the property could be revoked at any time without notice. A letter dated, soon, as other white investors acquired surrounding property, efforts increased to remove African Americans completely from the beachfront. So a letter dated January 27th, 1933, from William Rogers to Harcourt Bull reads like this: "Dear Mr. Bull, Edward Ball called me at noon today and said that he had just acquired title to the Manhattan Beach property. He would like to buy from us a strip of land about 1,000 feet deep immediately behind his Manhattan Beach property. He would also like to get us to cooperate with him in excluding the Negroes from Manhattan Beach insofar as possible in order to get them entirely off the ocean front, north of the southern limits of Atlantic Beach. I should very much like to have a conference with Mr. Towers, Mr. Crawford, and you at your early convenience to see what action we should take with reference to these two phases of the matter. Yours very truly, William Rogers." So Rogers and Bull, along with Crawford and Mr. Swartz, were partners in the RCBS Corporation. So when the Atlantic Beach Corporation went bankrupt, Bull was successful in folding some of his assets into this new corporation. And Edward Ball may be a familiar name to some of you. Edward Ball is the subject of this letter, and he was an influential figure in Florida business and politics. He was also an avowed segregationist. Mac Wilson's grandson, Mr. Kenneth Lassane, relates the story that has been passed down in their family, that Mac Wilson eventually could not withstand the intimidation measures meted out against his family and the family business. And in 1938, the Wilson family business was burned to the ground. And this was orchestrated by Harcourt Bulls RCBS Corporation. Adding to this, the Florida East Coast Railway had closed its route to the beaches area in the 1930s. I believe it was 1932. So what this meant was the community in downtown Jacksonville no longer could take the train to and from Manhattan Beach. And adding to this, erosion was a constant threat to Manhattan Beach. So by the late 1930s, when the structures were being burned, attendance was down, and eventually the RCBS Corporation acquired all of the Black-owned oceanfront property in Manhattan Beach. So what did they do after that? Well, in 1935, and some of you may be familiar with its location, William H. Rogers, who was part of the RCBS Corporation, built a 9,000 square foot home at the northernmost point in Atlantic Beach. So this is located just 1,700 feet south of Manhattan Beach. And in 1947, the RCBS Corporation replatted Manhattan Beach as part of a new coastal subdivision called Demise Ocean Acres. And then eventually in 1967, Jacksonville investor Winthrop Bancroft donated a 5-acre parcel in Seminole Beach to the city of Jacksonville for the creation of Hanna Park. So the city undertook a massive campaign and eventually accumulated all of the coastal acreage that lies between the Rogers House and Seminole Beach for Hanna Park development. So as Manhattan Beach was in decline, 2 other African-American beach resorts emerged in Northeast Florida to fill the void. American Beach to the north and Butler Beach to the south. A.L. Lewis, a founder and president of the Jacksonville-based Afro-American life insurance company, became Florida's first Black millionaire. He was no doubt a witness to the obstacles faced in Manhattan Beach, and he spearheaded a campaign to purchase coastal property on Amelia Island. And he began with 33 acres in 1935. But the resort town eventually grew to more than 200 acres of entirely Black-owned property and businesses. Rest and recreation without humiliation was the town's slogan, as residents and vacationers enjoyed their leisure time outside the reach of oppressive Jim Crow era segregation laws. I really invite you to visit the American Beach Museum if you haven't done so already. They're located at 1600 Julia Street in American Beach to learn more about this really important landmark. Also in the late 1920s, Frank B. Butler, who was a pillar of the Black business community in St. Augustine in their Lincolnville district, began buying seaside property on nearby Anastasia Island. And by the late 1940s, Frank Butler had developed Butler Beach into a coastal destination for the surrounding Black community. There's also a really fantastic museum in the Lincolnville district of St. Augustine, and I encourage you to visit that. So what's the good news? The good news is that when I first gave this presentation in its roughest form, when I was still in graduate school, one of my classmates chimed in and said, "You should put a marker there." And I thought, who, me? But that stuck with me. And through my work at the Beaches Museum, I thought to myself, I should put a marker there. And so we did. We went through the process, and it was a very lengthy process. The application is very long and somewhat arduous. They critique everything, every single letter in your text. I sent it off to a couple of professors who helped me proofread and edit, but we eventually passed the application process. We also, and this was one of the biggies that I wasn't sure about, you have to obviously have permission from the current landowner to place a marker. Well, the current landowner is the city of Jacksonville. And so I just typed up a nice little email and I just sent it on off. And it didn't take long. And the director of Parks and Rec said, sure, go ahead. And so here we are. And we had intended to install this marker in Hanna Park March of last year, but we all know what happened March of last year and is continuing to happen. So our plans have been delayed, and but here it is. Here's our marker, and it's so much more beautiful in person. And this is the moment in time where the presentation goes from recovering Manhattan Beach to reclaiming Manhattan Beach. And so this marker is for all of those who were there, who made it the community it was, including Mac Wilson, who was mentioned in the marker, as well as William Middleton. And so as soon as COVID decides to be on its merry way, we are planning a marker installation and a dedication ceremony in conjunction with the Beaches Museum. And it is my preference, and I think everyone will agree, that we should wait until it is safe to travel so that everyone who wants to attend in person can be there. But you know, I really cannot wait for this day, and it's been a very long time coming. So there you have it. That is my presentation. And as Chris mentioned, I will be happy to take some questions, and hopefully I know the answers. But if anyone has a question, I don't know, Chris, if you want to moderate or how you want to do this.
Sure. I would say if you have a question, you can either raise your hand, or I think we have probably not too many people rushing to ask a question. If you want to just unmute your phone and speak up. I did want to, you definitely talked about American Beach, but we hear a lot about American Beach was the first African-American beach. And can you just state specifically the years that why is it not the first?
So here's the thing with first. For better or worse, we have a preoccupation with being the first, or who was the first to do something. And so when I talk about Manhattan Beach being Florida's first African-American beach resort, which is very important, I say that just to establish a timeline, because it's just very important for the general public to understand how this process unfolded. And so the key difference is yes, Manhattan Beach was founded in 1900 and hit its heyday before American Beach was founded. But there is a key difference here. Manhattan Beach was never entirely owned by Black landowners. So yes, American Beach is the first real, true Black beach in Florida. It is entirely Black owned. So that's the key difference. But those who went on to found American Beach were first visiting Manhattan Beach. And so they watched all of this go down. And it was a motivator for them, among many other factors, to found American Beach to the north. Does that adequately answer your question?
Thank you. We had one question. Martha asked how big the marker was. I'm guessing 3 by 4 feet or so, but it's do you know the dimensions offhand?
I don't know the dimensions offhand. It is large. I would say probably 4 feet by 3 feet or something of that nature. And it's double-sided with the same text on each side. So whether you're coming up off the beach or you're entering from the parking lot, you can read the information. And so I should mention that the marker will be located at the actual entrance for Manhattan Beach. So present day, this is parking lot 8 at Hanna Park. And it's actually the busiest beach access at Hanna Park, which is fantastic. That means more people are going to see this marker. And it's going to be installed at a very prominent location right there at the beach walkover. So you cannot miss it coming in either direction. But that's where all of these Manhattan Beach structures were located, or right there in the dunes, just over the beach access at parking lot 8.
I have a question.
Oh, I just wanted to add one more thing on that. The marker, since it is a state of Florida historical marker, it will be on the website. If you go to just Google state of Florida historical markers, and you can see every marker down to the street. So you could just pick Duval County and see all of the historical markers. We have 2, I think, at the Beaches Museum property. We're also involved in a historical marker to denote the location of the Continental. And there's several others throughout the beaches. So if you ever want to do a little excursion one day, just hop on that website and you can see where they all are exactly located. And I think it was Paula was that you with the question?
Yeah.
Good.
Yes. Hi, Brittany. I'm so glad they're doing
I know.
this. And
I'm happy to hear from you, Paula.
well, and I came to one of your talks, and you have added to the show, so it was very interesting. I had 2 questions.
Okay.
Number one, on Facebook, I'm on the mayor's Facebook here in Atlantic Beach, Ellen Glasser, and they're talking about, which I don't know much about, but I used to teach there actually. Finnegan Elementary School is trying to change its name to Manhattan Beach Elementary. And I was wondering if there was anything you could do to help them get that through. They vote on it next month.
Okay, so yeah, so I've actually been a part of that conversation behind the scenes with the activists that are pushing for a name change. So for those of you who don't know, there is an elementary school located right there at the entrance to Hanna Park, and it's Joseph Finnegan Elementary. And he was a Confederate leader.
Colonel.
Colonel, okay. And so many see this, and certainly this can be interpreted as an affront to the Black history that is ingrained in this land. And so my part in this, and which I have voiced before, is uncovering this history, making it public, putting this marker up, getting the word out, so that when it comes time, if the vote is in favor of the name change, it doesn't seem like something that is just arbitrary or a knee-jerk reaction, that this is something that has just been unknown, completely unknown. And you know, I think it's great. Manhattan Beach Elementary, I mean, it just has a really nice ring to it, and in my opinion. And you know, it's more, if you're going to name, and I gotta say, I'm not an activist. I don't have the backbone. I cry very easily. I just can't do it. And Chris knows that I'm a crier. I cried in her office a lot for some reason. Not because she was a bad boss. She was a great boss. I was.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yes. So I just, you know, that's not my role. my role in this is to provide the information. So if
Okay.
you're going to name a school after something in that area, I just think it makes more sense for it to be named after Manhattan Beach, just and coming from a practical nature. But again, I'm not going to wade into those waters, but yes, I've been somewhat involved in that behind the scenes.
Okay, and my second and last question is, I'm kind of mixed up on the boundaries of Manhattan Beach, because in the talk, did it start at 16th Street and run up to, or did it start at 20th?
No,
Or
so yeah, it was,
you
when
said
yeah.
16th Street.
So when Harcourt Bull was mentioning 16th Street, that's because that was really the northernmost boundary of where they had platted and the land that they had fully owned, and where they had already planned development. So beyond 16th Street, yes, it was a rural area, but that was really not the beginning of Manhattan Beach. Manhattan Beach was a little more to the north. So if you think about the present day boundary, when you're driving on, what is that? So Seminole Road?
Yes.
Okay. And when you get to the very end and you can go no further and it's fenced off, right there, that's where Manhattan Beach would have begun.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great questions, Paula. I think you reminded me that the Beaches Museum was given the Harcourt Bull papers. So we have a huge collection from the founding father, really, of Atlantic Beach, and the city of Atlantic Beach has actually given us a grant to help us index and catalog those. So there may even be more information as Brittany continues to develop her research. There might be even more there. I hope that there is, and it's been really interesting to see this presentation develop and to be part of along for the ride on some of the thread pooling, and one of that was getting to meet Mr. Ernest Davis at the Boussoir. And somebody asked the question about what that restaurant was, so I typed it into the chat. It's BOOSWAR, and although Mr. Davis is no longer with us, his son is operating the restaurant, and I recommend the pork chop sandwich.
I recommend the double crabs.
The double crabs looked
If you
also
get
good.
the French fries, ask for extra crispy. I'll drop them back in the fryer for you. It's so good. Don't go there if you're on a diet.
I have two questions. Can y'all hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Here, I'll show myself. Across the street from the Claire White Museum are the remains of a hotel where a lot of famous, that was pretty much Black dominant. A lot of famous musicians stayed there when they would come to town. Do you have any records of them, like Louis Armstrong, for example, coming to Manhattan Beach? And were there areas nearby that they could play? Or when they went to the beach, was it just beach and no little clubs?
Yeah, no, I mean, that would be fantastic if we had something showing that those musicians were also playing at Manhattan Beach, because there was certainly live music. There was a lot of live music happening. And if you look closely, let me see if I can go back real quick, although I'm not actually sure how to, let's see. Here we go. You know, if you look closely at this photograph on this boardwalk,
Yeah,
these are musicians here. And
wow.
you can see a piano right here. So there was definitely a lot of live music happening. I have not come across anything that ties any of the famous musicians that visited Lavilla to Manhattan Beach. Although, you know, the story is not done evolving. It's a story that's constantly evolving with the help of the public, and just whenever I have a moment to start digging again in different directions. And I'm sorry, what was the second part of your question?
I didn't get it out. But you know, it seems, considering musician nature, it seems likely they would have come to the beach and possibly played.
Yeah, yeah. I definitely wouldn't rule it out. It's just something that's an unknown right now.
Yeah.
And for a long time, outside of the Continental, which eventually became the Atlantic Beach Hotel and Manhattan Beach, there were some little spots in Atlantic Beach to the west that, but those I think came a little later. I think one was the Bluebird Cafe or something like that. But no, there weren't a whole lot of night spots. And that's what really sets American Beach apart from Manhattan Beach. They eventually owned 200 acres, and you did see that kind of development: hotels, houses, restaurants, nightclubs. And that was the vision for Manhattan Beach. It just didn't come to fruition.
Eartha White had a lot of connections.
Mhm.
I mean, if you go to the Claire White Museum, you could see a picture of her with Nixon, for example.
Yes, yep.
When the ownership started changing over, do you think that because since she was using it to send her fresh air fund kids, is there any evidence that she did anything to fight this, or was it one of those things that she chose to pick her battles elsewhere?
I do believe to a degree she did her best to hold out. There exists correspondence between Eartha White and Harcourt Bull, and you can sense the tension in it. And it's essentially Harcourt Bull telling her, these structures are dilapidated, they're in disrepair, you guys aren't doing enough to take care of this place, you better do something about it. So a lot of the correspondence is Harcourt Bull kind of giving her some veiled threats. But she wasn't the kind of woman that was shaken by threats, veiled or unveiled, to be honest. And I just think her continued presence there was a form of resistance to this intimidation.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to make a quick plug. I meant to say this back when Paula asked about Finnegan Elementary. There is a presentation that MoCA is hosting tonight, also on Zoom. I did confirm that they are recording it, speaking about the Confederate monuments. And the presenter is Dr. Scott Brown, who is a UNF professor, but he's an art historian and he specializes in medieval art. So put all that together for a presentation, and it's sure to be interesting to hear about Confederate monuments from the perspective of a medieval art historian. And I think that if you guys have been in any of our partnership lectures with Cummer Beaches, then you know Scott Brown and know what a fascinating lecturer he is. So I would encourage you to keep an eye out for that recording to come up. And listen to that if you're interested in the subject. And I think it's something we should all be interested in. And then there were a couple questions in the chat. Would Hanna Park consider recreating part of the beach at that time, like a Mac Wilson bathhouse look? Is that something that's been Hanna Park really tries to be very natural, so I'm not sure they would contemplate that.
I don't know that they would, because as if you're a beach resident, you know that the dunes are a protected ecosystem. And so certainly they would not install any structures on the beachfront or on the dunes as they had been done previously at Manhattan Beach. But Hanna Park has been in lockstep with me the entire way. And a lot of this I've done, especially pursuing the marker, I've done with their help and their full cooperation. And the park manager over there, Victoria Albright, she just is the biggest cheerleader of this campaign to install the marker. And I do know that they are hoping to increase their educational programs as it relates to Manhattan Beach. They have a facility, I think it serves as the Nature Center currently, but I know the park naturalist, who is also very interested in this history, is endeavoring to hopefully interpret the history of Hanna Park, including Manhattan Beach, but also going back into when that land specifically was part of Spanish Florida, and then into the present day. So they are looking to increase signage awareness education regarding Manhattan Beach.
I got two more things. Brittany, I asked my art supervisor, I'm retired, if Jacksonville was going to be doing anything for 1822 was when it was established. Next year would be the bicentennial year for Jacksonville. And he said that with all the Black Lives Matters and things going on in Jacksonville, they think that he's not heard of anybody in the city planning anything to celebrate the bicentennial. I wanted to be involved because of the name of our city being Jackson.
Well, I can't speak to that because I'm not aware of any conversations to that.
Well, I think it's sad that we're going to be 200 years old and, really not even going to mention it. And there's nothing in the city of Jacksonville that I can find that they're even going to say, 200 years.
Well, I gotta say though, I think, a celebration like that would be a big endeavor and a costly endeavor. And I know from event planning myself, that's something that would have already been in the works years ago. And since we're in the era of COVID, I can tell you beyond a shadow of a doubt that that is a major determining factor in any celebration, much less a brand new celebration. So I think it probably has more to do with that than any other current climate.
That's true. I just wanted to do something. I've been locked up. I've been painting, and I'll show you. I'm inspired by you. Here is the train coming from Manhattan Beach, stopping at the Neptune stop here, but it's not finished. I haven't finished it.
That's wonderful.
Thank you, Paula. We have another question. Can you just recap how many years you've been working on unfolding the history of Manhattan Beach?
When did I begin? I think 2017, early 2017, I think is when it began. So 4 years. It has taken me 4 years to put together this presentation.
And I think there's been so much interest. I mean, you've been on Melissa Ross's show, you've had article in Jacksonville Magazine, you were just on the local CBS network. It really just shows how much interest there is in this area. And I think the historic marker is such an important piece of that. It's not the whole thing, but at least it'll show people that something was here, because you would never know to go out there now. You would never know these buildings were there. That looks like it's it for the questions. And I will say that we are recording this talk, and it will be available on our YouTube channel in the next couple of days. And if you haven't checked it out, we do post most of our Boardwalk talks on YouTube. That was a quarantine project for us to get those all up there. So we've got all sorts of great topics, including this one, within however long it takes us to get it up there. And we encourage you to check that out. So thank you, Brittany, so much. And thank you for everyone who attended today. We're clapping, but everybody's on mute, so you might not be able to hear them.
I appreciate it. It's been my pleasure.
And thank you to Miss Davis, as well as everyone who has helped Brittany put this story together and just continue to add to the tapestry of the narrative. We really appreciate all of you.
Really.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Have a great night, everyone.
Thank you. That was great.
Thank you.